Welcome to the TEFL Training Institute podcast, the bite-sized TEFL podcast for teachers, trainers, and managers.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the TEFL Training Institute podcast. This week I'm very excited to tell you that our guest is Professor Stephen Krashen from the University of California. This episode I asked Professor Krashen about what teachers need to know and what stops them from finding out. Enjoy the interview. Professor Krashen, welcome to the podcast. Can you start off by telling us a bit about what do teachers need to know? What sort of research and concepts, maybe from second language acquisition, do teachers most need to know about?
Well, what I want to do is talk a little bit about theory, what I call the 40 Years' War. It's actually longer than that. God, you know how it is when you discover that your old pair of pants is 30 years old and your new pair is 20 years old, you know? That's the situation I'm in. Anyway, the 40 Years' War is really now nearly the 50 Years' War. This all started in the 70s. It's a war between two hypotheses. One of them, which I think is the good guy, I call the comprehension hypothesis, and it's very simple. It says we acquire language and develop literacy when we understand what we hear, when we understand what we read. Credit where credit is due, I am not the inventor of this idea. I have been mostly responsible for public relations and seeing if it's true or not, but there are several people who were there before me in the field of literacy. Frank Smith, raging genius in my opinion. Kenneth Goodman, the whole language people were, in my opinion, all there. And they had it. We learn to read by understanding what's on the page. We learn to read by understanding messages. In the field of second language acquisition, people like James Asher, Total Physical Response, he was there before I was. Harris Winnetz, a foreign language expert from the States, was there before me. A whole number of people had the idea pretty well, and I do try to cite them in my work. And this is what we've been working on since the 70s. We acquire language when we understand it. Now, here's the interesting difference. The rival hypothesis we call skill building. Skill building and comprehension idea, are complete opposites in terms of cause and effect. Comprehension hypothesis says the cause is comprehensible input. The cause is understanding what you hear and what you read. The result is vocabulary, grammar, writing style, all these things, competence, in other words. Skill building reverses it. Skill building says the first thing you should do is study, do things consciously and work hard, memorize vocabulary, learn grammar rules, practice them in output, get your errors corrected, make sure it's right. Do this again, and again, and then someday in the distant future, you will be able to use the language. I call this a delayed gratification hypothesis. Not happiness now, but happiness later. Comprehension hypothesis says happiness now. In fact, it's got to be pleasant or it won't work. You have to have input that you understand and that you pay attention to. You'll only pay attention to it if it's interesting, if you like it in some degree, if it means something to you. The problem with skill building is that the delayed gratification never comes. In my opinion, there is not a single case of a human being on this planet who has ever acquired language using skill building. Every time you see someone who got good in a language, they've had comprehensible input. It's never there. It never exists without that. And our studies where we compare comprehension and skill building, which is really all we've been doing for the last 40 years or so, comprehensible input always wins. It has never lost in all the experimental research, not one. So it's more effective and it's more pleasant. My observation, and it's backed up by the research, if you look at kids in a skill building class, 95% of them hate it. The 5% who like it become language teachers. These are the people who love grammar, who think diagramming sentences is fun, and I know because I was one of them and I still am. It took me years to overcome my fascination with Noam Chomsky and grammar, etc. They really, really like it, but that's not how language is acquired. Well, so two things. comprehension hypothesis, the research supports it, does not support skill building. The comprehension hypothesis makes language acquisition pleasant and fun. Skill building makes it torture. So this is win-win. But here's the problem. For the general public, the skill building hypothesis is considered to be an axiom. People are not aware that there's an alternative. For all civilians, and even a few in our field, skill building is the only game in town. So if you think we learn language by study, hard work, all the ways we torture students in school, all the grammar exercises, all the tests, all the quizzes, they make perfect sense. But that's not the way it happens.
Let's talk a bit more about teachers accessing research then. What do you think stops teachers from reading more about teaching and more about research?
Everyone complains teachers don't read. This is the general mood in the United States, that teachers are stupid, teachers are responsible for the depression, economic hard times, etc. So this is part of the general attack on teachers. Well, we have done studies on this, and teachers read a fair amount, but they don't do a lot of professional reading. And my feeling is it's not their fault. There are three problems, and they're serious. One is professional literature is extremely expensive, and it's getting more so. If you want to get the latest advertisement for professional books, papers by experts and all that, $150 American. I don't know about you, but nobody can afford this stuff that I know of.
Definitely not on a teacher salary, right?
Not even on a retired professor's wage, on nobody's wage. I don't know anybody who can afford this. And they're getting more and more expensive. Journals, which used to be kind of reasonable. You could subscribe these things for, $15, $20 a year. Now it's way up there, hundreds of dollars. I keep records on this because I deduct it from my taxes, but I can't afford it anymore. Much too expensive, especially if you're someone like me who tries to work in several different fields at the same time. It's not just one or two journals. I have to keep up with about 30 or 40 journals. Nobody can afford this. The only people who can are people who are current university professors who have access to a first-class library, and that's very few of us. Okay, so it's too much money. Number two, the articles are really long, and they've gotten longer. Someone once said, when you ask someone the time, you don't want a history of the wristwatch. People have long introductions, and then at the end, they want to give everyone advice on what they should do with their research. Ridiculous. Far too long and far too incomprehensible, full of jargon. I wrote several paper on this called, The Case Against Gibberish, which is what goes on in the journals. They are written not to be read and understood. They're written to get published. And with junior scholars, very often it's their PhD dissertation. So someone wrote me the other day, said there's a new article on age differences. And that was, one of my major research interests, critical period, all that. And the person sent me the link to the article. The article is about 40 pages long. And for me to get it, I have to pay $40 US dollars. The dollars do not go to the authors. They go to the journal. Now, for me to read a 40-page paper is a full day's work. And I must say, I'm very good at reading. I have all the background knowledge. I've published lots of papers. I know the research very well. I've usually read already most of the citations. It takes forever to get through these things because they are so dense. They want to put in everything to show off. So it's impossible. I've given up.
Yeah, it's long struck me as ironic that in a profession that's really all about simplifying our language to the point where it can be understood by language learners, that we do such a bad job of presenting useful information to teachers in a format which is easy to read, especially when you consider that most of the teachers out there, English teachers anyway, are non-native speakers of English. So why do you think that happens? Why is so much TEFL literature so difficult to read?
A lot of it has to do with impressing your colleagues, basically, making it sound profound. One of the political writers in the States made a really good argument. He says, when you take a simple idea and you make it very complicated, you can hide. You can say the most outrageous things and feel good about yourself, and no one's going to understand it, so you're okay.
Yeah, That reminds me of Charles Bukowski. He said that an artist takes a complicated idea and makes it simple, and an academic takes a simple idea and makes it complicated.
Charles Bukowski, what a guy. Okay, yes.
So that's the problem with teachers not being able to get their hands on readable and affordable research. Do you want to tell us a bit about the solution?
I have been inspired by a couple of people. First of all, there's a guy named Tim Gowers, and his specialty is algebraic geometry. He announced that he was no longer submitting papers to journals. He was no longer reviewing papers for journals. That, just as I said, the journals are too expensive. Nobody can do it, and it's no longer worth it. He started a petition. 17,000 scholars have signed it. Possibly every major mathematician has signed it, including my son, who's a math professor. So proud of my boy. What has happened because of Tim Gowers is that libraries started cutting back. The mathematicians were not ordering the journals, didn't matter anymore. And now Europe has a full-blown campaign in favor of free open access research. The problem with it is that if you're a junior scholar and you want to get a job, or you're an assistant professor, you want to be promoted associate, the review committees typically, except in math, have no respect for open access. This will only change if people like me, senior scholars who are not going to be reviewed anymore, and other people not worried about review, start doing it. And eventually it will catch on. My real inspiration for this, though, was the Grateful Dead rock group. The time the Grateful Dead were touring, there was a lot of concern about piracy, about kids coming out and recording the songs and sharing it with their friends. And sales of recordings started to drop. So, they policed the concerts. You may not record this against the law, blah, blah, blah. The Grateful Dead turned it all around. They would start their concerts by saying, you want to record us? Go ahead. They decided not to make money on recordings, but to make money on touring. And it worked. So this is, of course, I haven't figured out how to make money yet, but at least I'm doing the first step, okay? I'm not going to do it through selling books, etc. Nobody can afford them anyway. So this is the revolution. So my hope is that it will spread.
Fantastic. So putting this all into practice then, where can teachers go to start finding research and literature on language teaching that's easy to read and hopefully free?
Okay, here's what they should do. And I'm going to push my stuff, of course, because that's the whole purpose. We're talking about my career, okay? I give this stuff away from free. All you got to do is go to sdkrashen.com. SDKrashen, operators are standing by, sdkrashen.com. That's my website. There's, like 300 articles posted. And if you follow me on Twitter, please consider, ladies and gentlemen, following me on Twitter. My goal is to catch up to Justin Bieber in followers. This is probably going to take 4 centuries at the rate I'm going. Twitter's great. What I use Twitter for is for short announcements. My papers, my colleagues' papers, and how to link to them. Or occasionally some political comments or some really good jokes. But please follow me on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook, just Stephen Krashen on Facebook and several other categories. And I use that for, again, bad jokes, but also to tell people what's new. And I think this is the future. Social media is wonderful for disseminating information. And if you look at me and my stuff, you're going to find other scholars who publish free things. I have really exceptional colleagues in Korea, Kyung-Suk Cho, in Japan, Beniko Mason, Taiwan, Thian Lee, Willie Ramanda from now in Singapore. All of us do this stuff. We post things, etc. And then you find other people. They're short, and we hope they're easy to read. That's simple, and it costs nothing.
Great. Well, thank you very much again for coming on.
Okay, Russ, thanks.
And we'll see you next time, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more podcasts, videos, and blogs, visit our website www.tefltraininginstitute.com.
If you've got a question or a topic you'd like us to discuss, leave us a comment.
And if you want to keep up to date with our latest content, add us on WeChat at TEFL Training Institute.
And if you enjoyed our podcast, please rate us on iTunes.